I will never forget the sound of my own name being erased. It wasn't shouted or spat with hatred. It was whispered as if it had never mattered. Rowena Caldewyn, daughter of legacy, of honor, of the blood that founded this city, rendered invisible in a single dawn. I grew up surrounded by walls that allowed no cracks, dressed in expectations woven with silence and duty. Everything about me was measured, rehearsed, shaped to fit the golden frame of the Caldewyn family. But no one warned me that even frames break. When they came, they didn't knock at the door. They didn't announce the coup. They arrived with smiles, raised goblets, and veiled promises. And while my father toasted with ghosts of trust, I felt it, in the chill down my spine, in the knot in my throat, that we were about to fall. But no one listened to me. And when the night ended, the castle still stood, but it was empty. There were no more crowns, only echoes. No more thrones, only overturned chairs. And I, the princess, saw myself reduced to dust among the ancient books of our history. It was in that exact moment, with my name erased and my heart in ruins, that I understood. Surviving the fall isn't enough. You must learn to walk among the rubble without letting it bury who you truly are. They thought I was dead. And for a brief moment, perhaps I was. Not my body. It kept breathing, aching, reacting by instinct. But something inside me, something that still believed in the solidity of blood and the weight of honor, was torn away when I saw the eyes of those who grew up beside me gleam with a taste of betrayal. I remember the metallic tang in my mouth, the throbbing pain behind my neck, the blurred vision as the whole collapsed into chaos. But I remember, with even greater clarity, the hand that pulled me through the shadows, rough, determined, without a word. I don't know how we survived that night. I only know that when I woke, the world that shaped me no longer existed. I was hidden in a place where the name Caldewyn meant nothing. No one called me milady there. No one lowered there. Eyes when I spoke or forced smiles out of courtesy. For the first time in my life, I was just a broken young woman, sleeping on a hard mattress and eating whatever was available, and curiously, I had never been so free. The pain didn't come only from cracked ribs or the bruises scattered across my skin. The real pain was the silence, knowing no one would come for me, that my family had become a page torn from the city's book, and that the blood running through my veins, for centuries a symbol of power, was now a death sentence. Yet it was in this throneless exile that I began to see with clearer eyes. I walked the streets that before I had only glimpsed through the windows of the entourage's carriage. I listened to the voices of the people, the ones that never crossed the palace gates. And I realized that the fall of my house wasn't just orchestrated with weapons or strategies. It was fueled by years of distance, neglect, a throne that had closed too tightly in on itself. The coup that destroyed the Caldewyns wasn't just political, it was inevitable. And as much as it tears me to admit, part of it was our fault. But even so, they were wrong to think they could bury me along with my surname. There were nights when I wished I hadn't survived. Not out of weakness, but out of exhaustion. It was easier to imagine an end than to accept the humiliation of being forgotten, erased like an inconvenient stain on the linen of history. I heard my name twisted in the mouths of the media, Rowena Caldewyn missing, suspicious involvement, the last breath of a failed dynasty. I saw men who once served me kiss the hands of usurpers. I saw faces that owed me loyalty laugh at gala dinners, now funded by those who toppled my world. The wound left by the fall no longer bled. It burned, because it was made of memory, and with memory came fragments of who I was, what they made of me, and what I could still become. There was no more comfort, no guarantees, no privileges. But something new was growing silently within me, a kind of strength that isn't born in a golden cradle but on cold ground. With each day away, each truce swallowed, each face that turned away, I stopped being the obedient princess and became something I didn't yet know how to name, something that didn't just seek to return, but to return differently. And when I finally looked at my reflection in a cracked mirror, pale skin, sunken eyes, marks of a life I never asked for, I realized something they had never taught me. I was still here. I, Rowena Caldewyn, not the perfect daughter, not the image of an empire, but the woman who survived her own fall. And now, with the world believing me dead, I had before me the most dangerous freedom of all, the freedom to choose what to do with my own pain. They say pain is a reminder that we're alive, but they don't say what to do when it becomes all you have. In the first months after the fall, I was nothing but that, pain and silence. I walked the streets in borrowed clothes, head bowed, with the constant feeling that at any moment someone would recognize me. But no one saw a Caldewyn there, just another shadow among many, a pale face trying to blend into the wreckage of a city that, now free of my family, pretended to breathe easier. And yet, I saw in people's eyes something the newspapers didn't mention: uncertainty. Fear disguised as relief, because every new order is born stained by what it had to destroy to exist. It was on one of those gray days that I heard my name, spoken softly for the first time. Not from an enemy's mouth, but from an old gardener who once tended the flower beds of our estate, forgotten, bent by time, but with an intact memory. He called me Rowena as if I were still a princess, as if I still belonged somewhere. I almost cried, but I didn't. I sat beside him without saying who I was, and listened to stories I had never been told, about the city, about the underbelly of power, about deals that precede any coup. And for the first time, I understood that what was taken from us wasn't just the throne. It was the blind trust we had in our own untouchability. In time, others began to appear, people who quietly carried the name Caldewyn in their hearts, seamstresses, librarians, retired teachers, ordinary people forgotten, who had been touched by some ancient act of my father, my mother, or even me, in the rare moments when the mask slipped and I was just a curious girl trying to understand the world beyond the gates. They owed me nothing, and yet they gave me everything. A plate of food, a temporary roof, a hidden letter that said more than 1,000 speeches. They gave me the chance to listen, and by listening, I began to remember who I was, to remember what they did to me, but above all, to remember what I could be without asking permission. There was a moment, and I remember exactly when, that I realized I was no longer running. My steps had changed. I no longer walked like someone hiding, but like someone studying the past, like someone who knows that every alley, every face, every hesitant word carries a clue. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was something growing within me. Grief gave way to attention. Anger refined into discipline. And pain became fuel. I, who had been raised to maintain appearances, now learned to strip truths bare with a glance. That's how I began to uncover what I never would have learned among marble columns and diplomatic speeches. There was an invisible web sustaining the fall of my house. Institutions once allied had turned their backs, not out of conviction, but through blackmail. Companies were bought in silence, journalists paid to tarnish our names with insinuations. People disappeared without a trace, records erased, and even our crest, the symbol that spanned generations, was reconfigured by hands that never respected it. The city wasn't just being rebuilt, it was being reprogrammed. The new order wanted to erase what the Caldewyns stood for, not out of justice, but out of fear. And the more I saw, the more I understood that the coup wasn't just against my family. It was against everyone who dared believe that history is made by those who live it, not by those who control it. I spoke with dismissed teachers, old friends of my grandfather, a retired secretary who kept hidden copies of unpublished documents. One by one, I stitched together fragments of the truth like someone mending a sacred fabric. And in that process, I began to rebuild something even more valuable, a network, not of power like before, but of people. People who remembered what the Caldewyns were in the beginning, before pride poisoned us. People who saw in me not the fallen princess, but the only one left with eyes open. And it was alongside them that I understood the difference between inheritance and legacy. Inheritance is what they leave you. Legacy is what you choose to carry forward. They still looked at me like someone gazing at a dead legend, but I no longer needed to be feared. Being remembered was enough, and little by little, with words exchanged in markets, with subtle gestures among neighbors, with glances that lingered a second longer than they should, I began to feel my name spreading again, not as a scandal, but as a seed, and seeds, when well hidden, bloom where no one is looking. Flowers that grow in the dark have deeper roots. It was with that phrase, spoken by an old woman who barely remembered my face from childhood, that I understood the nature of what was forming. The reconstruction wouldn't be like before. There would be no trumpets, no banners, no proclamations in public squares. What I was preparing moved like time, slow, relentless, inevitable. And the strangest thing was realizing that the less I spoke, the more they listened. Silence had become my shield. Invisibility, my greatest advantage. Those who took the throne laughed at banquets, convinced the greatest danger had already been buried. But real danger doesn't shout. It observes, learns, waits. And I was waiting. I began to plant doubts, small, almost imperceptible. A half-resolved memory whispered in the right ear. An old file left carelessly within reach of a curious journalist. A disguised visit to a woman who lost her son after the new government cut promised subsidies. I had no army, but I had memory. I had no castle, but I walked through invisible corridors in people's hearts. Those who knew, even if they didn't say. Those who were afraid, but were starting to tire of it. Because fear, when it lingers too long, turns into a thirst for courage. There was a growing force beneath the surface. I felt it in the way some doors once closed, now cracked open, in the complicit glances exchanged in silence, in the messages left on unsigned papers. Those who had once bowed to the new order were now beginning to wonder if it would last. And the name Caldewyn, still forbidden in official speeches, began to echo like a whisper between walls. Not as a symbol of lost power, but of interrupted justice. That's when I made my first public decision, even if no one knew it came from me. I used an old network, hidden among files and false accounts, to expose a fraudulent contract, signed by the new regime, involving lands once protected by my mother. The revelation fell like a stone in the center of a lake, silent at first glance, but with ripples that spread faster than anyone expected. They tried to hush it up. They accused journalists. They shut down pages, but it was too late. The city had tasted truth, and truth, once touched, refuses to be forgotten. That night, lying in a room that wasn't mine, with my heart beating as if announcing something yet unnamed, I understood. The return wouldn't be a repetition. There would be no crowns back, on my head. But there was something more dangerous than power. Purpose. and now that the world had felt my first step, I would not retreat. They expected me to return as a shadow, as an echo of what I was. A broken woman dressed in nostalgia, begging for what was taken. But I didn't return with outstretched hands. I returned with eyes raised, and with a silence so firm it forced others to listen. There was no announcement, no parade, no declared alliance. My presence revealed itself slowly, like the breeze that precedes a storm. First in discreet meetings where my name was spoken with hesitation, as if invoking it was still dangerous. Then in small protests, where ordinary faces carried words they hadn't learned from newspapers. The city was changing, not because of me, but because something had broken in the collective heart of the people. The lie at last was showing cracks. And when a lie cracks, truth finds a way. I walked among those who once only saw me from afar. Not as a symbol, but as an equal. I touched calloused hands, heard stories of losses no one ever reported. And I discovered that my pain, however noble, wasn't greater than theirs. It was only different. They too had lost. Freedoms, voices, dreams, the coup that destroyed. My house had also eroded theirs. And it was there that I ceased to be a princess, because titles can be taken. But what grows between wounds and trust, that no one can tear away. I found allies among the forgotten, leaders forged in the absence of leaders, women who held families alone, youths who built networks to protect neighbors, former servants of my house, now volunteering in shelters. They didn't need me as a symbol. They needed me as a bridge. And I accepted being that bridge between what we were and what we could still be. The elite laughed at first. They called me mad, a fragment of a past no one wanted. But they didn't laugh for long, because every action of mine revealed detail they tried to hide, and every silence I kept became more threatening than 1,000 speeches. I didn't need to shout. The people were starting to do that for me. That's how I realized I wouldn't return to the throne. I would dismantle it, stone by stone, symbol by symbol. Not for revenge, but to show that no one should need a throne to be heard. And when at last I was called back to the table where it all began, surrounded by faces that once ignored or feared me, I sat not as an heir, but as a force, as a voice, as someone who was silenced but learned to speak to the world through what she built in silence. And there, before all that was once taken from me, I looked around and knew I no longer wanted what was mine. I wanted something greater, something new, and this time no one would have the power to take it from me. They say great stories end with justice, but mine ended with choice. There were no fanfares, no speeches from balconies, just a silent dawn where faces that once feared me now looked at me with respect, not for who I was, but for what I had become. Rowena Caldewyn, the princess who survived the fall, was now just Rowena, and that was enough. The old family palace was left behind. Its walls still hold echoes of what we were, but they no longer belong to me. I built my place among the people, among those who taught me what all my years of aristocratic education could not. That courage isn't in leading from above, but in walking alongside. That true nobility isn't inherited, it's proven, it's earned. The name Caldewyn still lives, not as a cry of power, but as a reminder of what we learned by losing everything. And me? I no longer wear a crown, but I carry scars, and they shine brighter than any jewel ever placed on my head. Because I wasn't made to reign, I was made to resist, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The end